what made you jump to the opportunity of Florida on day one? Like, what did you see that obviously others did not? Hey everyone, welcome to our latest Trade of Black podcast. I'm your host, Shad Dales. A lot of positive sentiment this week towards cannabis. A lot of investors obviously interested in how these stocks performed. We want to bring you very insightful information featuring the best thought leaders in the space. Very happy to be bringing in, first time on the podcast, she is the CEO of Trulieve, which trades under the ticker symbol TRUL on the CSE. Kim Rivers, good to see you, and thanks for joining us for the first time.
Hey, thanks so much for having me. Good to see you as well.
Before we get into business talk, I know there was a few tweets you put out last week. Hurricane, the now passed, everyone's fine. A little crazy, I would think. Always some interesting times in cannabis. You got to deal with the volatility of it all, plus the weather being in Florida, right?
Yeah, that's part of it. I'm born and raised Floridian, and so it comes with the territory. I thought you were going to talk to me about the Florida State LSU game. So
we beat the pants off.
I am still in my Garnet and Gold. I have to say it's the week of Garnet and Gold here at our Tallahassee headquarters at Trulieve. But yeah, the hurricane. It's not anything that is new to us. Kind of fortunately or unfortunately. And our team always does. I'm always super impressed from an operational perspective. We were able to get 60 stores closed, but then immediately reopened within 24 hours. Obviously, making sure that our folks are okay and health and safety first and foremost. But then also, of course, making sure that from an operational perspective, we have as little impact as possible. So, team did an amazing job. Super proud of them, and hopefully, it's knock on wood. Hopefully, it's a one and done this season.
Don't look now, but your Seminoles are ranked 4th in the nation. Pretty impressive.
Oh, I know. I know. Me too. We don't want. It's early. It's early days. So we don't want to. And Duke's coming from behind, which is craziness. I thought Clemson was going to be the team to beat in the ACC, but anyway, so we'll see. It's a lot of football ahead this season. It's my favorite time of year.
Yeah, before we get into like some of the business operations and some of the earnings reports that you reported last month, just wanted to get your thoughts and reaction about the HHS and the recommendation to the DEA, which was around a week, about 8 days ago. But I'm sure you probably thought it's about time, but it's been a breath of fresh air and brought some new life, obviously, to the industry.
Yeah, absolutely. It coincided specifically with the hurricane. So I don't know, maybe we want more storms. Maybe that's a new superstition that we can add here. But, I would tell you, obviously, this is the single biggest catalyst that I believe that we have in cannabis. I think most folks would agree on that. When we do our modeling and we look at what life looks like and can look like without 280E and without the pressures of 280E, it's a very different story. And it really is exciting. I think that, for us, we look forward to a quick conclusion here and believe and have believed for quite some time that this will come to a head, obviously, prior to the election next year, and continue to believe that. All of our insight is that, look, this recommendation was based and is grounded in science. I'm very much, as I know we all are, very much looking forward to being able to review the research that was provided by the FDA. I continue to believe that, of course, there's the 280 impact, but I think maybe, I won't say as important, but up there is also the fact that now we've got a true policy-based finding by a top government agency that allows us to move the needle on a host of other policy-based reform within Congress, because it really has been, and for those of us who've been on the Hill these last years, it's been an incredibly circular and frustrating conversation, because it's, how can we be confident as a policymaker, as a legislature, that we're not putting someone's life in danger? Mm-hmm. Where's the research? We need research. Well, now you have an actual finding, right, that there is acceptable medical uses and that the danger level is lower, reduced. So I think that some of the sentiment we've recently seen from Senator Brown around safe banking, et cetera, it's just going to accelerate those conversations as we try and get off center here for a more holistic reform landscape at the federal level.
That's interesting. You almost think that once, if and when the DEAs make a decision on rescheduling, you're thinking it's going to be a domino effect amongst other things when it comes to more and more reform.
100%, right? Because now there's this, that roadblock that we've had around there not being research and there not being any kind of a real need for these products. That's you can't say that any longer. And so now it really does allow us to shift into, we know that this is the direction we're headed. What is that federal framework going to look like? Where is this? How are we going to be regulated as an industry, right? I can tell you right now, the FDA is like, hold on a minute. We don't have the resources. We need more guidance from Congress. They're asking for, right? Like, if you want us to be at the table, this needs to be a broader conversation. Certainly when you think about Transportation Administration, when you think about, ATF, when you think about, there's a lot of interplay among agencies here. And it's a complex and nuanced, right? I know we all, especially in the capital markets, we like things to be, headline and simple and easily digestible. But really, when you start to peel back the layers here, there's and meaningful decisions that have to be made that will absolutely, in a meaningful way, impact the trajectory of our business and everyone else's.
Do you think? I mean, a lot of the, I guess, conversation, a lot of the conversation outside of the two initiatives that we've just talked about. I mean, it's Florida adult use comes up a lot. Do you think that seeing loosening or like speed, loosening of the regulatory fronts on a federal level, do you think that's going to make its way down to the state legislatures to where they start to open up towards the adult use initiatives that we're seeing in Florida, Pennsylvania, and Ohio? But I mean, most notably Florida is. I mean, that would impact your business.
Yeah, I think it does a couple of things, and I think it really does get down to the posture of the state, and politics are local, right? Yeah. And I don't think that can be overemphasized, really. So I think that, right, it certainly helps with, I think it will help with sentiment. I think, right, again, when there's the FDA, which is, for all intents and purposes, kind of the gold standard as it relates to safety and research. So when you have a finding by the FDA, again, that this is not, right, the most harmful and it deserves to be rescheduled based on research and scientific evidence, I think that certainly is helpful to move the perception and the narrative along and out from this completely prohibitionary mindset. So that is only helpful.
Yeah.
As it relates to the state programs and the state legislatures themselves, I do think that that's going to really come back to how are they postured ahead of time, right? There's a big difference in terms of legislative positioning with Florida versus Pennsylvania when you just look at the history and the leanings and the kind of direction that those governments have acted, particularly on this issue over time. I remind folks all the time, right? Florida is a sea of red. It's just, yes. Are you pink or are you red, right? And then sometimes you're so red you're purple. Yeah. So that's how we operate in Florida. But remember that the medical program that we operate under today came to fruition or was birthed in that environment. Right. Yeah. Right. So it doesn't, and that's why you hear me talk often about this isn't a Republican or Democratic issue. If it were, we wouldn't have a program in Florida.
Right. Correct.
It is a human one. And so how do we continue to advance that conversation? In Florida, obviously, we're incredibly excited about the possibility of adult use. We made a large investment there. This is my plug where I ask any and all of my peers to feel free. I'm happy to give you, it's just kim.rivers@trulieve.com. If you'd like to make a contribution or get involved, you can reach out. But that market, we believe, is going to move pretty rapidly to be one of, if not the largest market in the country. Yeah. We believe it can be a $6 billion opportunity, 21 million residents, 131 million unique tourist visits a year.
Big impact.
So it's going to be a monster, and we're very, very excited to be at the forefront and to be able to participate in it when it happens.
Yeah, I mean, it's been widely part of my investment thesis. I mean, I'm down in Fort Lauderdale, so I mean, I'll go. I'm a patient too, so I mean, I'll mostly, awesome. I don't want to say they're channel checks, but like I'll go into dispensaries just to like prod around and see what's going on. And I mean, I'm not saying this just because you're on the show. There are no busier dispensaries in South Florida that I've seen other than Trulieve. I sit there when I'm waiting. I count the patients and I kind of listen even to like what the basket sizes are and the velocity of people coming through the door. It's surprising to say the least sometimes. But they're booming down here in South Florida.
Well, you indicated in your earnings call last month that this potentially is a $6 billion market if rec does pass. What's your thoughts? What's your feeling on how you're progressing? Like you just said, like you're a big supporter of the Smart and Safe Florida, which is basically an advocacy group in the state to garner enough support. You've donated as much as $39 million. So you've got a voice to say the least. Where are we with this?
Yeah, so over 1 million Floridians have signed the petition, more than enough to deem it valid to be placed on the ballot for next year. The current step that we are in the process is that it is pending Supreme Court review. In Florida, every citizens ballot initiative has to go through the Supreme Court. They're checking for two things, and it's two very specific things. One, that it does not violate the language of the ballot summary, does not violate the single subject rule, meaning it has to only address one topic. And secondly, that it is not that the summary is not misleading to voters, meaning that the summary adequately and accurately reflects the text of the actual amendment, which is what will actually go into the Constitution.
Gotcha.
And so it's just those two things. We feel as good as we can feel around the language and the tightness of the language. There have been a number of Supreme Court rulings on this topic, including the medical expansion amendment that passed overwhelmingly. That passed, by the way, with the highest approval rating of any ballot initiative in the history of the state of Florida, with over 70% approval rating, and as well as two ballot initiatives that failed for failing to pass the single subject and that misleading. And so the Supreme Court actually mapped out, and they called it a roadmap, in terms of what folks need to do and what language specifically they need to include in future initiatives on this topic, which we've done very explicitly. And so, again, I think that we feel as good as we can about the opportunity to move forward and for the Supreme Court to give us a positive ruling on this.
That's the major sentiment I think that we've learned, Anthony, in the last 6 months. Is just we're getting people out there and advocating for it now, but letting people know how much they support it, speaking to your local constituents, and just keeping the communication going. Because at the end of the day, sure, lobbyists can do certain things in Washington, but if you've got petitions signed and people are showing up, I think enough's enough. But I feel like we've turned that corner, Kim, a little bit in the industry. Do you not think?
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, I think that, look, and listen, Anthony would know this, like, folks in Florida are very passionate about this issue. I mean, as they are in a lot of states. And so we've had really great grassroots participation really at every step of the way as we've gotten the medical program off the ground, as we've hit in roadblocks. Smokable flower, if you remember, wasn't available initially in Florida. Edibles weren't available initially in Florida. Hydrocarbon products weren't available initially in Florida. So it's been a progression. And I will say that the grassroots and the advocacy that has come behind those initiatives, because, obviously we're out front and we're pushing, and again, lobbyists, et cetera, but really to have the voice of the people and voice of patients, voices of veterans, voices of moms, voices of everyone who's affected in a very real way in utilizing cannabis in their daily lives has been incredibly important. And also part of the education process, again, these are Republican, typically conservative folks that we're talking with. And as it becomes more real for them, as they understand the fact that dispensaries have opened in their districts and the sky has not fallen, that we're active members of the community and we're participating, and that we're responsible and we're, regulated, and we're putting out safe products that are tested, and we're employing thousands of people, all of those things matter. And, but I would say for sure, as this process continues down the road here, we're absolutely going to need, in order to get it across the finish line, folks to remain involved and remain engaged, and certainly engaging with their lawmakers and the executive branch as well.
Yeah, I mean, I know we've talked a lot about Florida. I mean, a lot of people see Trulieve as a Florida company, but I mean, you are in powerful markets across the nation. I mean, Arizona, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Maryland, Georgia. I mean, how is Georgia shaping up? Because a lot of people I don't want to get too speculative, but a lot of people are kind of thinking that you're going to deploy the strategy you deployed in Florida in Georgia, as you're an early mover in that medical market. And I mean, it's Ohio and PA speak for themselves. They've got momentum. But how is Georgia shaping up?
Yeah, so Georgia reminds me a lot of how Florida looked early.
Really?
That is absolutely true. And I think that it is similarly not getting a lot of attention, which I like it that way. That's great. Fine. Yeah. From a lot of other folks. And I think that folks are taking a wait and see approach. We prefer to go in and to be at the table as laws are getting developed and as the program is ramping, so that we one, can make sure that we're servicing our patients and customers to the best of our ability, but also we're there on the front lines educating lawmakers and really, again, helping them understand, right, how their decision making is impacting lives. So, right now in Georgia, just as a reminder, we've got several dispensaries currently open. We can expand that out. The exciting thing that's happening in Georgia right now is that they have allowed, and this is unique to Georgia, this did not happen in Florida, they're going to allow pharmacies, independent pharmacies, to distribute cannabis products. And so we're in active conversations with pharmacies, and that's really exciting in terms of when we think about points of distribution and how we can have, really sort of deploy our branded product strategy through another retail outlet, but certainly in a controlled and kind of education forward way. So that's really exciting for us, and that's gonna it's moving through rulemaking now, but we plan to see that roll out within the next call it 6 to 12 months.
Wow. Do you see the same sentiment among citizens in Georgia as you do in Florida? Just the approval rate to like everything legalized, like it's the same kind of sentiment in that state as well?
So again, so it's Georgia's got a same setup in terms of when you think about the kind of the political backdrop, right? And so which is in the Southeast, so it's going to be incremental.
Yeah.
And right, I mean, I love the Northeast, and I appreciate the mindset there and the fact that things can move relatively quickly. We can have debates in terms of the rollouts and whatnot, and whether that's good or bad. But in certainly the typical profile, not that everything's going to be exactly the same, but as in a Southeast, more conservative, it's going to be incremental. So you're not going to have necessarily this huge windfall. It's going to be small wins over time. You're moving the ball down the field, again using Football Reference, where my head's at, right? You're having just first downs, right? 8-yard, 5-yard plays, and then all of a sudden, right, you look up and you're in the end zone. And so that's really how Georgia's going to play. And again, that's fine with us, because it allows us also to scale alongside the growth of a program, as opposed to having to come in, right, which we've seen across the country, right? Folks coming in, rushing to deploy capital because they, and then, right, maybe it works out, maybe it doesn't, because maybe the program doesn't exactly, right, come to fruition the way that everyone anticipated, and then you're backtracking. So we like the setup in Georgia, and I'm excited about the growth that's ahead for that market for sure.
I would assume North Carolina might be the natural step up. I'm paying close attention to their medical market. It's medical market forming, which is taking the same approach. People don't understand culturally, because I talked to a bunch of people like, oh, South Florida. They're like, oh, Florida's all like Miami, correct? I'm like, no. Once you get out of Palm Beach, we're pretty much culturally the same as Georgia. Like, it's very Southern, it's very red, and things do move slow. But I mean, if you want to make that argument, I mean, the market in Florida is shaped up. It's a healthy market for cannabis. It's rolled out slow. It's taken its punches. It's gotten its wins. But it is a powerful market, arguably the best in the country. Right now.
Kim, if we backtrack, like when is this company launched? How many years ago now?
So we are about 7.5 years in.
7.5 years, and all you've done is pretty much made it the biggest cannabis company in the world. But why? What made you jump to the opportunity of Florida on day one? Like, what did you see that obviously others did not? Because we all know in business, if you're going to be successful, focus on one thing first and do it really well, which is what you did.
I would tell you that, early on, when we were evaluating the opportunity in Florida, there were a couple of things that really stood out. Number one, the fact that it was Florida. So Florida is where many franchises, particularly in the restaurant space, determine success. So they pilot concepts in the state of Florida because, to Anthony's point, there's wide variability in demographic across the state. And so you have really different areas of the country represented in different pockets in the state of Florida. So if you can be successful in terms of penetrating and having true brand penetration in the state of Florida, there's a lot of portability potential in that. So that was number one. Second, there's the power of the population, right? Florida's a big state. We have population here, and we had the ability to get to scale. And so the way that the Florida program was developed is, right, it was, yes, they were vertical, and this kind of the expense that goes into that, but it was unlimited cultivation, unlimited retail, unlimited production. And so we had the ability to get to scale quickly, which meant that, right, we were going to be our own barrier, as opposed to having a programmatic ceiling in terms of how fast or not we could grow. And so, our thesis was very, very simple. If we can be customer first, if we can penetrate Florida in a meaningful way, because the other thing, if y'all will, I'm sure y'all will recall, but at the same time, MSO, the concept of MSO was coming into vogue, right? And so there was just deck after deck after deck of these map slides that would show, right, I have 2 stores in California, therefore I have a TAM of whatever the population of California is. And I just fundamentally disagreed with that at my core. Like, that's just complete BS, right? Your penetration is how many registers do you have? How many people can you see in an hour? And what kind of products do you have on your shelf? And what's your average ticket, right? I mean, so that's false. And so we had the opposite thesis. It was, instead of planting flags on a map, can we truly penetrate what we believe to be one of the biggest opportunities in cannabis in a meaningful way, and put our blinders on to everything else, which was probably the harder thing to do.
I'm sure you've seen a lot of change in the state too. You still have a 40% market share within the state, which is a big stranglehold on it all. But a lot of competitors have entered in the space. You probably have seen a ton of change over the last few years pertaining to it.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, yes and no, is what I would say, right? It's a disproportionate market, right? I mean, so in a very meaningful way, which I'm sure since you're in Florida, you're very well aware, and where there is a top number of players that really have the vast majority of the 80-20 rule that plays out in business everywhere, but you see it in a very week over week, because we have numbers that are reported, which are just volumes. And I always like to put out that asterisk, because I think folks get really caught up in that. But remember, it's just volume. So I could literally give a ton of cannabis away, and it would look like I just gained billion points in market share. So it is a little bit can get folks wrapped up. But I think that, so for us, I would just say that the focus hasn't changed for us as it relates to being tied into the customer, understanding customer preferences, which have dynamically shifted. I think that's true across all markets, not just in Florida. Being responsive, being able to quickly respond, and us continuing to lean into our strength, which is going to be scale. And we set out very early to make that a differentiator for us, not only in Florida, but for any market that we choose to operate in. And that continues to play well for us.
Yeah, and I mean, you've brought the brands in. I mean, most notably Alien Labs. It's Sunshine Cannabis, I think, is the other one. I mean, developing. Do you see developing that brand portfolio and starting to develop the brand equity in those different names as like paramount going into adult use to really take that business to the next level if and when that hits?
Yeah, I mean, so I think one of the challenges that we had in Florida in early days was this notion that, look, it was forced vertical. So we have to manufacture, and 100% of every product that's on our shelf in the state of Florida comes from our cultivation and our manufacturing facilities. So for us to be able to understand, lead with consumer, well, consumer wants variety to some extent, right? So how do we get that variety given those constraints? And that's when we really piloted this notion of brand partners and developing brands and making sure that we were partnering with the right brands. And Sunshine Cannabis was one of our first. Sunshine Cannabis, those guys have been legacy advocates in the state of Florida, huge supporters of home grow, huge supporters of adult use. So for us to be able to create a win-win and really bring that brand to life in a meaningful way, we think was a key part of our strategy. But ultimately, it's about the customer. So certainly, I think that for us, providing the right mix to meet customer need, while also making sure that we're thoughtful in terms of where our in-house brands sit from a portfolio perspective. And again, you want to give choice, but you also want to make sure it's thoughtful choice. It's not overwhelming choice. We've all been in the dispensary in California where you're like, oh my God,
it's deer in headlights.
Why are there 50 different choices for a vape cart that is like basically the same thing? So making sure that we're thoughtful in terms of brand placement is definitely part of our strategy.
I know something that means a lot to you, and you guys do this a lot, and it's great to see within the industry, is making sure you pay your taxes and paying your taxes on time. You actually outline this a lot in your earnings call. You maybe want to elaborate on that and why that's important for investors to know and learn?
Yeah, I mean, I think for us, I mean, listen, I don't know that I ever thought that I was going to be a public company CEO and have a conversation around the fact that we pay our taxes on time.
Right.
So I got to tell you, it's not because it's just pointing out a differentiator really at this point. I mean, it's the fact that, right, like I mean, I guess you can look at it one of two ways. From an investor perspective, number one, I think it's important for everyone to know whatever name they hold, right, what their debt obligations are and who they're with. I mean, that's certainly important. And, I think that if you're in the camp where you think this is a brilliant strategy and it's something that, folks should take advantage of, we still have that dry powder, I guess, is one way to look at it. In that, right, like if you look at a 12 to 18 month run rate in terms of taxes and our ability, if we decided to deploy the same, similar strategy, that would certainly provide significant dollars, available. But the second thing is, right, when we think about, right, how we're going to be positioned, if uplisting does occur, which we certainly hope sooner rather than later, right, when we're talking about having actual sort of longs come into the space, big institutions, funds, et cetera, we certainly think there are certain things that are going to be expectations from an investment strength perspective, and I don't know that those folks are used to reviewing companies and making investment recommendations with certain things on balance sheets. So, but I mean, look, to each his own. I think for us, it's just we're pointing out that this is the route that we've taken, and we're comfortable in it. That doesn't mean that we're not constantly evaluating tax strategy, that we're not reviewing that very regularly, that we're not, thinking about it and have folks working on it all the time. We do. But it's, I think, I wouldn't say it's just, I feel like just people need to know where we sit and be in a position to compare and contrast.
I mean, I think it's important. I think it's very important because, I mean, I wasn't truly aware until this last round of earnings, which companies had which liabilities on their balance sheet. And I mean, it's a big liability. I mean, it's one that implicates you with the 3-letter agency that you don't ever want to hear from. So I mean, it's nice to not see it on the Trulieve balance sheet, and I'm hoping a lot of the other companies clear it up, especially in light of potentially this 280E relaxing coming down the pike.
Yeah, folks are going to have choices to make, right? I mean, because there's certainly in the time period that we're coming out of, where capital markets have been constrained, and folks haven't had optionality, and we haven't gotten safe banking, right? I mean, there's definitely decisions that have been made, and those are going to come due, and that's going to be another round of just how folks are positioned and how we can take advantage of that, that new environment going forward.
Don't look now, but the macro market seems to be up in arms while cannabis is performing well. Nice to see, isn't it?
Yeah, don't jinx it.
Yeah, it's famous last words. It's been nice this past week seeing the energy come back into the space.
But look, I know you're a CEO.
From a capital market standpoint,
you can't rely obviously on announcements, but you have to admit in the last week or so, do you feel like it's just a lot of this hard work that you've been putting in for such a long period of time that you've honestly are starting to see, a little bit of the results, knowing that, hey, once in a while it might be nice to get some help. As far as like government officials and reform is concerned, I'm sure it's, got to have some sort of play to it.
Yeah, I mean, listen, it's I try very hard not to get swept up in the highs or lows, quite frankly. I think that's part of my responsibility in terms of being a steward of this organization and leading, thousands of employees who you want engaged and giving it their all, regardless of what's happening in the background, right? And having the attitude that it's gonna all work out, right? I mean, it's a weighing machine over the long term. And I think that what you have with Trulieve and certainly with our executive team is we're in it. And that's what we talk a lot about. Are you all in, right? We're all in. And so we're here for the long haul, and we're here to see it through. And I think for us, it's just, it certainly helps, right? Listen, I'm not going to say I want it the other way. It certainly helps. But I think what is more exciting for us is, again, looking at down the road, taking that just weight off of the company's shoulders of 280E, being able to model and have conversations about optionality. And I mean, again, we've always run sort of this parallel path to scenario situation, but really seeing a light at the end of the tunnel in terms of when that we believe that will come into play. And the moves that we're going to be able to make and the difference that that's going to be able to make in terms of our investment choices is incredibly exciting, for sure.
Keep up the great work. It's great to see, obviously, some positive momentum pertaining to this industry. And I think both Anthony and I look forward to running into you in Chicago for the Benzinga conference later this month. I'm sure the sentiment will be a lot more positive than what it was last April. And that's a great thing. But listen, we appreciate the time, and let's keep in touch.
Yeah, thanks so much. See y'all soon.
Thanks, Kim. So what'd you all think of the interview? Did you like what we recorded with our guests? Then leave a comment below and let us know what you thought of it. And if there's any more questions you want us to ask, as usual, share this video with your network. Click on that bell for all notifications. And most importantly, subscribe to our channel because we would not be here without you. Thanks for watching, everyone.